Feminists like to claim bodily autonomy as a women's issue. They're so married to that attitude that they get offended when men's issues advocates discuss it as a genderless human rights issue, and even more so when we discuss any aspect of it as a men's issue. They're particularly aggressive about defending intactivism as female territory, reserved for indignation over female victimhood, so much so that they cannot allow discussion of boys' experiences to stand without inserting their opinion that female genital cutting is worse and is therefore always more important to discuss. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. The truth is that there are multiple variations in the methods used on both sexes, with some methods used on boys being more mild than the methods most commonly used on girls, and some methods being worse. A good source for information on the spectrum is a video by Freedom O' Speech titled "Difference Between Male and Female Circumcision," linked at the end of the transcript for this video. Feminist victim Olympics over genital cutting rely on false comparisons between girls' worst experiences and boys' mildest, while the most typically done types performed on each sex are not so dramatically different. Throughout most of the world, feminists have fought for laws forbidding the infliction of any type of genital alteration on underage girls, including pricking and piercing, which are far less severe than the two most common and commonly legal types of male genital cutting. They condemn all underage female genital alteration as misogynistic, a patriarchal attack on women and femininity, then condemn intactivists' efforts at ending routine infant male genital cutting as a distraction from, and therefore an attack on, female intactivism. Outside of feminist circles, the intactivist movement is genderless. The fight is not about whether one sex has it worse, but about whether the procedure, when done on children, is an unethical violation of the human right of bodily autonomy. The movement addresses a variety of questions related to this underlying issue. Is the targeted tissue vestigial, or does it have a purpose? Does the procedure cause harm or create risk of harm? Does the procedure actually provide the medical benefits attributed to it? Do those alleged benefits, if proved to exist, merit tissue removal? Do they outweigh any harm or risk associated with the procedure? Do they constitute such an immediate need as to eclipse the patient's autonomy rights? Is the procedure painful, and does this pain constitute abuse? Does the patient have a right to any recourse if upon reaching adulthood, he or she resents having been subjected to the procedure as a child? For including the rights and experiences of infant boys in this discussion, intactivists have been demonized as misogynists, accused of whining about a non-issue, and even treated as a threat to practitioners. And that's just the attitudes faced by advocates who do not divide the issue by gender. While underage genital cutting itself is not a gendered issue, male circumcision is an entirely male issue, distinct from the issue of female circumcision in two ways that affect male intactivism. First, as demonstrated by the differing responses to intactivist efforts depending on the sex of the victims whose rights are being advocated, there is a huge gender gap in compassion for cut individuals who regret or resent their caregiver's decision to have that done to them during their youth. Women who were cut as children are recognized as victims of a violation of their bodily autonomy, as victims of abuse, and as individuals who have suffered a loss that merits regret or resentment. While it would, of course, have been better for the patients involved if they'd never been cut in the first place, there have been successful efforts to provide to cut women some level of relief or restoration. These efforts have attracted many compassionate volunteers, including some truly brilliant physicians, leading to some very innovative surgical techniques. Male intactivists have had to struggle for recognition of their issue, much less any similar level of public compassion. Research into restoration for cut men has had to take the form of research into regrowth of skin tissue for a variety of purposes, including treatment of burn victims, in order to justify funding. While women have had access to restorative surgery for decades, research into foreskin restoration is still in progress, with Forigen's tissue restoration research currently in its preparation stage for animal trials. Their Phase 1 research on the decellularization of human tissue was published in Sage Journal of Tissue Engineering and is available open access. A link to that research is provided in the transcript for this video. Second, female circumcision was never widely popularized as a secular practice for any reason, even when a U.S. doctor tried. Male circumcision was, and the reason given was an attack on male sexuality. Circumcision wasn't popularized as a secular practice until during Victorian times. Doctors began recommending it as a means of discouraging masturbation. This originated with the advice of Swiss physician Samuel Auguste Tissot, whose writing on the topic standardized in Western medicine the perception of masturbation as a debilitating illness. While he cited case studies from among his own patients in his reasoning, he's strongly suspected to have been influenced by an anonymous book, Onania, the heinous sin of self-pollution and all its frightful consequences in both sexes, a religious screed that consisted mainly of its author's interpretation of a few Bible verses about sodomy and lust. These attitudes were amplified by one John Harvey Kellogg, leader of the anti-masturbation movement in the United States, who recommended genital cutting without anesthetic as a rehabilitative punishment for both sexes. While gynocentrism protected girls against the normalization of such practices, circumcision went from a rare practice prior to Kellogg's interventions to a standard practice in U.S. pediatric medicine in the latter half of the 20th century. While feminists cite female genital cutting as evidence of patriarchal oppression of women, its incidence has been reduced throughout most of the world and is limited to areas where religious beliefs and traditions override all logic on the subject. In those areas, the practice is enforced not by men, but by women. During that time, male genital cutting not only increased in use, but has been the subject of a concerted effort, complete with junk science, to accelerate its spread. To this day, there are people who wrongly believe cutting some skin off a guy's genitals can protect him from HIV infection, despite research and criticisms that have discredited that claim, and even evidence that the myth itself might increase risky behavior and therefore all sexually transmitted infection risk. Part of the reason there is such a big push to keep the male genital cutting industry going is that neonatal foreskin fibroblasts are quite profitable. Among the things they're used for, women's anti-wrinkle creams. You heard that right. An industry exists to use skin that has been removed from infant boys' genitals as an ingredient in products women put on their faces to ward off visual signs of aging, like real-life incarnations of the mythology around Hungarian serial killer Elizabeth Bathory, rumored to bathe in the blood of virgins to preserve her youthful appearance. If an industry had been built around harvesting girls' clitoral hoods, the female foreskin, to extract fibroblasts used to make any product, especially one for the cosmetic benefit of men, protesting feminists would explode from rage, especially if the harvest was paid for not only by private insurance, but also by government programs like Medicaid, as male circumcision at times has been. Their complaints would be without end. Patriarchy proved, sit down and shut up, you misogynistic, child-abusing sexual terrorists. They couldn't ask for more solid evidence of systematic institutionalized female oppression. When men complain, pro-circumcision advocates try to shame them for wanting the fullness of their natural sexual experiences, the same complaint women have about female genital cutting, as if that makes them obsessed with sex or perverse in some way. They're accused of being anti-science. Their protests are labeled melodramatic. Their genitals are described in derogatory terms: dirty, ugly, disgusting, and shameful. Women's aesthetic preferences are even brought up as a pro-circumcision argument. And male intactivists are castigated for stealing a women's argument, that of bodily autonomy, as if men do not also have bodies, and men are not also possessed of humanity, and therefore human rights. And while in no case has any judge ever ordered a parent to sign a form consenting to the cutting of his daughter's genitals, in 2014, a Florida prosecutor criminally charged Heather Hieronymus for refusing to sign just such consent in regard to her son. She was ordered into mental health treatment over her refusal, and Palm Beach County Circuit Judge Jeffrey Gillen, citing Centers for Disease Control advice, ruled that Heather was legally obligated to consent despite her significant objections to the procedure. The boy's bodily autonomy rights were never even considered by the court. Systematic? Check. Institutional? Check. Sexist? Check. Oppressive? Check. Feminist protest? This week, HBR Talk will discuss male intactivism as a male issue, a human rights issue, and a medical issue. The discussion streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in to the YouTube live stream or find other viewing and listening options for that time or later on HoneyBadgerBrigade.com.